Hello guys, welcome back to the last part of the interactions tutorial. In this one, we are going to be finishing up the interactions and making them naturally interact. If you've been following closely since the last tutorial, you should have your map data with your interactions folder and your game states folder. You should have some prefabs that are all interactions, all have primary parts, and in your main script, you should have your map setup script with the setting up of your interactions as shown here. So, continuing on from this, if we were to hit play right now, we have our interactions all spawn on the map. However, they don't have any actual prompts or button pressing to make them do anything as of right now. So in this episode, we are going to be adding both the prompts and making the prompts do things. We are also going to make it so that the survivors can actually win by using said prompts. What is a proximity prompt exactly? A proximity prompt is a built-in Roblox tool where if you put it in pretty much any part, or in our case model, it's going to automatically show a little UI prompt with a button for you. It's pretty much less scripting involved and more tinkering with the settings. It's literally called proximity prompts. I'm putting it inside the primary part because that's where I want it to be. And if you go down here to the properties, you can change its action text, which is what shows up for the proximity. Require line of sight is whether you can hit it through walls or not. I don't want that to be the case. And then you have max activation distance, which is how far it'll show up away. And you have gamepad key codes, keyboard key codes, which change to the buttons you need. I'm going to change my action text to pick up since that's what we're doing to the fuse. Object text is the object's name, in our case just a fuse. So if I hit play now after adjusting the object text and the proximity text, you see it says fuse, pick up. I didn't change the key, so it's still E. Another fun fact about the proximity prompts, you can also click them to activate them. The most important property is the hold duration. If you have it at 0, you basically just tap or press the key or button to start it. However, if you have it more than 0, you have to hold it all the way before the proximity actually triggers. In our case, we don't actually have a script yet, so we have nothing to trigger. So let's add a quick script real quick. It can be both a server or a local script. If you want it to happen on server, which in our case, we want it to happen on the server, we're going to make it a server script. So we're doing script.parent first to actually reference the proximity prompt, and then we're going to do the .triggered event, which is what happens when you get to the end of the hold or when you tap it and it's on tap mode pretty much. And since it's a server script, it also tells you which player triggered it. In our case, it's going to say this was triggered by CheatMCU, my name. And every time I get to the end, it'll always say that. And if I change it back to the tap mode, I don't have to hold it anymore. Just simply tapping it or clicking on it will trigger it instantly. So, now that we're a little more familiar with the proximity prompt, we're going to actually code what we want this prompt to do. In our case, when I interact with the fuse prompt, I want the fuse to disappear and go into an inventory of sorts, and I'm going to use attributes to represent that inventory. So in all your other prefabs, make sure you also put in a proximity prompt in your primary parts, since that's the part you're probably going to want to be looking at, the center. And I'm also adjusting my settings to be what I want them to be. In my case, I don't want you to be instantly inserting fuses, so I'm going to make it a 3-second hold duration. But fuses, I do want you to be able to instantly pick up. Now that we have our proximity prompts and the other prefabs, it's time to get to the actual coding bit. So I'm going to clean up my code by making it a bit more nicer. We're doing a reference to the whole fuse. And then now we're going to do the reference to the proximity prompt, which is just script.parent proximity prompt. And now we're going to go back to that triggered event like last time, and we are going to want the player to know which player we need to give the fuse to. And like last time, we're going to use the fuses collected this time so we can implement the win condition. But I don't want them instantly getting the collected fuse. That's going to be for the fuse box. So in this case, what we want to do is give them something to interact to the fuse box with. So if they do have a character, we're going to set that character's attribute to has fuse to true. However, I also want them to not be able to pick up another fuse if they already have a fuse, because otherwise then you're just going to have missing fuses all of a sudden and they won't be able to complete the game. So we're going to check if they already have it true. If they do, then make it so that if they don't have that, then you set it to true. First part, just make sure we have a character. Second part, make sure that we don't already have a fuse. So now that we have a fuse, the last part of the script we're going to need is to make the actual fuse itself disappear. So fuse.remove is our fuse colon remove will do that for us. So now if we quickly test and go to fuse and pick it up, it disappears and we should have the attribute after we pick it up. Easy peasy. Now our fuses are officially done for our game. So we're going to drag that back into prefabs and all the fuses will work just like that whenever we spawn into the map. Now the next part we're going to need for the actual survivor win condition is the fuse box itself, so they can actually have somewhere to put the fuses in. So much like last time, we're going to need another server script. This will be the fuse box script. And this time we are actually going to use the fuses collected attribute. So, in this script, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to check if they actually have a fuse when they interact with the prompt. And then if they do, we're going to want to take that fuse away from them, and we're going to want to set the amount of fuses collected to whatever value it's currently set to +1. So here, much like last time, we're checking if the player has a character. If they do have a character, this time we're doing the exact opposite of the fuse. We're checking if they have a fuse. And if they have the character and they have the fuse, then we're going to set their has fuse value back to false, so it removes the fuse from them, technically. And this time we're going to add a fuse collected instead of removing the box, since we don't want to remove our fuse boxes. So, in our script, from the very first few episodes, for coding purposes, we'd always name our map current map to make it easier on us whenever we're going to work on other scripts. In this case, that's coming to reward us now. Workspace, wait for our current map, which is going to be our current map, and then we're going to go into map data from there on. And from game state to fuse collected, and then all we got to do is add 1 to the value. So plus equal basically does whatever its current value is plus, in this case, 1. And just like that, you pretty much have a completely working fuse box script. So now we're going to drag the fuse box back into the prefabs folder so that we can test this real quick to see how well it works or if it actually works. Now that we're in the game, let's go to the killer side real quick. Now, this is a weird bug. The killer can actually complete the survivor objectives. I imagine if you're having a normal game, you probably don't want that to be the case, and they can even insert the fuses too, if this works. It does not seem to be working, actually. Seems we have ran into more than one bug. So, there's two bugs. Fuse box is not working, and the killers can interact with stuff. If we go to our player, you can see that we have the killer attribute, so we can use that to prevent the killer bug. And if we go into our fuse box scripts, you see I left an extra little comma there. So let me just remove it. So remove that comma from your fuse box so it actually checks for the right attribute. And we're also going to check if the killer or survivor is a survivor. So now the player has to have a fuse, has to have a character, and has to be a survivor to interact with that fuse box. And we also want the same with the fuse. So we're going to check if they're a survivor for both fuse boxes and fuses. And now with those changes, it should actually work this time, and the killer won't be able to steal the survivor fuses. So if we roll over to killer, you see the prompt, does nothing because we haven't programmed anything. You see the fuse, does nothing because we're a killer. And doesn't add one to the value because we're a killer and we don't have a fuse. Now if we go over to the survivor and we hit the fuse, because we're a survivor, we can actually pick up the fuse. And if we go to the fuse box, this time with it hopefully working, that number should go up by 1, and it does. And if we try it again, we shouldn't be able to do it because we don't have a fuse anymore. So now we have that game state working. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make an actual win condition for the survivors now that we can adjust those values around. So the survivor win condition is obviously going to be based off of fuses inserted or fuses collected. When they collect a certain amount, then the game will end because they powered up whatever you want them to power up and they win. So currently our only win condition is for the killer to see if the survivors are all dead or not. So we're going to make a new function for making the game win condition more simplified. And it's going to have two outcomes, either killer won or survivor won. Technically 3 if you count none won. But anyways, we're going to steal from our code on line 157, 159 now, where we check if the game and players was less than 0, then return killer 1. Which is our current win condition. And if the killer hasn't won and the survivor hasn't won, return false because no one's won, meaning the game's still going to be running. However, if we go and look in our current map and we look into game data, or map data, and we get fuses collected and we get that value, if it's more than, in this case we're going to do a 1, then that means the survivors have won the game because they've collected enough fuses. Obviously you can set that number of 1 to higher or lower depending on how many fuses you have in your game, or whatever other game values you've chosen to make instead. And if that's the case, return survivor 1. Now we're going to add a little, variable here so that it's consistent throughout the game. And we're going to make it equal to game condition. We'll call this variable win condition since that's the condition we won with, until win condition, which makes it so if win condition is anything other than nil or false, it'll make this loop end and we'll continue on and to the next round. So while in the loop, we're going to keep refreshing the win condition to be equal to the game condition. So every time it resets or loops, it's going to check if the killer won or the survivor won. If neither one, it returns false, so it keeps looping. And at the end, we're going to put win condition since we don't actually have UI yet to display all that stuff. So if we hit start real quick and we go kill the survivor, it should say killer won because that was the game condition we have once this match resets. So now go back to the server. Killer won, says it once. Next, we're going to see if the survivor has their win condition working. In this case, we need to collect a fuse and place it in the fuse box just one time. We only have the one fuse. So pick it up, place it in, and the match should reset with survivor won. And just like that, you have win conditions for both teams now. Now, this last part is really only going to be for the polishing of the game. I imagine you don't want the killer seeing the proximity prompts of stuff they can't even interact with. It's kind of distracting. So to fix that, we're going to use a local script so it only affects that player who has it. And we're going to make it a prompt hider. So basically, on a local script, if you turn the enabled property of a proximity prompt to false, it'll still be true to anyone else who doesn't have that proximity script, meaning that this player will not be able to see the prompt, but everyone else can. In this case, everyone else is a survivor. So the idea is we're going to look for all the interactions and we're going to go through every single one, get every proximity prompt, and just turn them all off for the killer, since he doesn't interact with the map like that. And once we have this script working, what we're going to do is we're going to put this local script inside the actual killer weapon or tool, since they always are given the tool, and when they get that tool, all the proximity prompts are going to disappear because they pulled out the weapon. I think the script will also run in the backpack, so it should just disappear when they're given the weapon in general. So if interaction at primary part and the primary part has a proximity prompt, then go to the proximity prompts enabled and turn it off. Obviously, I am butchering the spelling right here. There we go. So that should turn off the proximity prompts. So now we have a function to shut down interactions. And now we need to make a loop and go through every interaction to shut them all down as they're added to the game. What this loop does is it goes to the interaction folder, which we got at the top there, which is all our interactions, and it shuts down the interaction. Now we're also going to check if the interaction is a model, since at the very start the interaction folder is filled with spawn points, and we only want the model since those are the only things that have proximity prompts. So now if we quickly test, it should be working unless we have a bug. So we're a survivor, we should see the... Oh wait, no, I haven't moved it yet. Never mind, we do see the proximity prompts. It seems I have done something wrong. Let's see. If I go into my game, do I actually have the prompt hider script? Yes, I do. So the prompt hider script is the problem. What could it be? All right. A hard jump cut here. I'm doing this much later. I figured out what the proximity prompt bug was after like 20 minutes of just staring at the script. It was a simple typo. If you were following very closely along, retype this correctly, and your script should actually work. I'll showcase it so you can see that it works. Loading into the game, you see my prompt hider. I actually have a bug this time because it actually works now. Let's see, quick bug. I actually look for the model in the prompt hider and not the actual primary part, so just add the .primary part, and it should start hiding prompts. And that is the last bug. After that, you should have pretty much what is a fully fledged interaction system shy of the doors, which I will be covering in the next episode about game balance / polishing. Yep, the killer doesn't see any more prompts now. Now all he has is the attack, and the survivor still sees the prompts as per usual. That's all for this episode. See you in the next one, which once again is going to be about game balance and polishing and actually changing speed so the game is more fun.